everybody, and welcome to the second day of the Hydropolitical Layer K Conference presented to you here at Unisa and in collaboration with Wageningen University, Professor Jeroen Warner. So today our program will unfold as follows. We're going to have a keynote address and book presentation by Professor Warner from the Wageningen University. This will be streamed via YouTube. And then at around 10 minutes past 9, we're going to start the first session, the analysis of hydropolitical dynamics. Professor Evaristo Banheira from Unisa, he'll be chairing that session. And we have online three international speakers, Alexandra Turgul from Oregon State University, Dr. Sumit Vish from Wageningen University, and then Alicia Ofori from Cranfield University in the United Kingdom. We're going to have a tea-coffee break at around 10:40, and then at 11 we start with the second session, chaired by Professor Tendai Sitoli, also from the University of South Africa. We will have two other online speakers, Dr. Sharon Pollard from, she was previously with Award in Mpumalanga, Professor Jackie Golden from the University of the Western Cape. Then we'll break for lunch, and then after that the third session starts, which I will chair, and then we will have again, three guests, international guests, Professor Larry Swatuk from Waterloo University in Canada, Dr. Sandra Meges from Wageningen University, and then Aline, it's Tail from the University of Geneva, and then another coffee break at around 2:10, and then the fourth session, which I will also chair. We have another online speaker, Dr. Nelson Odume from Rhodes University, and then Dr. Suvanya Naide from the University of South Africa. And then we will have a conference wrap-up and a vote of thanks at around 3:30. So, without further ado, let me introduce to you Professor Jeroen Warner. Now, Professor Warner and I, we've known each other since I think it is around September 2000, if I'm not good. Yes, I think it was in September, October 2000 we met for the first time at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. So we've known each other, I would say, for exactly 24 years now. And we have collaborated on numerous projects. We've published together numerous articles, book chapters, and on one book chapter, we collaborated with each other for 7 years before that book chapter got published. And we have also became, I would say, quite good friends over the past 24 years. We are in regular contact with one another. Last year, I was a visiting professor at the University of Wageningen for 2 months during May and June. And it's always, Professor Warner is my main go-to sounding board when I need to develop my ideas further. And so he's going to give us the keynote address this morning, and also introduce us to a book that he edited after his keynote address. So Professor Warner, over to you. I don't know if I should drop the mic because it's so important. Can I drop the mic? Thanks.
Okay. Hello everyone, it's a great pleasure and honor to be here at the University of South Africa. It's an open university, so Richard told me that he has some 100,000 students. Not all.
Almost
400,000 in total. We cannot match that in Wageningen, but the plus side is that we see more of our students than you do, because we don't do a lot of the distance teaching. As Richard said, we've known each other for a long time, and it's been a great pleasure to work together for almost a quarter century. But you saying that also makes me feel pretty old. But I'm still younger than Kamala Harris, so it should be okay. We have many online presentations today. That also means that those who may not have some trouble getting into the session or want to test your sharing facility to test your presentation, please contact Musa. I already put the note on in the Teams because I will not be able to do both things at the same time, present and do the admittance. This is a great opportunity to discuss multi-level politics, governance, water issues from the global to the local, and how these might be interconnected, and as well as test a bit whether the image of the layer cake, which I came up with about 17 years ago, will hold. Yesterday in our meetings we already had some question marks about that. I'm super open to that, because if we get better metaphors, then we can discard the ones that don't work as well. But it was nice to see that the layer cake also inspired people to come up with their own ideas and metaphors. So I'll talk a bit more about that. But I'm also going to talk to you about a new book. It will be a kind of underlying thread, and several of our speakers today actually are in this book. Just to give you an idea of my background, I studied international relations in Amsterdam before doing my PhD at Wageningen University in disaster studies. So I have two academic legs. One is transboundary water politics and water governance, multi-stakeholder conflict and cooperation. And on the other hand, disasters, crisis, and especially disaster cultures. You'll see a sample of the books that I edited, mostly with other people. And this new book that's coming up looks like this. I wish I could have brought you a physical copy, but it will probably take a few more months before the book actually comes out. But one chapter by Sumit Vij will be published open access online earlier than that. So I'll keep you updated when that happens. And Sumit, as Richard already said, will soon be joining us. He is actually joining us, but he'll be talking to us in about an hour or an hour and a half or so. This book has the same idea as the layer cake that we're discussing in this conference, but especially zooms in on transboundary waters. And the policy and politics of the transboundary waters. It's part of a 4-volume tome edited by Shlomi Dinar from, I think, Florida University. And the other editors are David Katz, Neda Zawari, and Gabriel Eckstein. A lot of lawyers, political scientists, public administration people, geographers, maybe people with an engineering background or hybrids of those join these books, have chapters in these books, meticulously edited by Shlomi, and it will be available hopefully in a couple of months. When I listened to the presentation yesterday, it was quite a lot about dolomites and other layers in the soil of South Africa, the stratigraphy of South Africa. And I thought this is actually another metaphor for the layer cake, the power stratigraphy, how layers of power at different levels, different scales, also influence each other. In the Netherlands, we have lots of clay, and clay is very hard to penetrate while other parts of the country are sandy, which is very easy to percolate. So if you see that as a metaphor, you could say that a clay layer is very hard to permeate for other sources of power, to have an influence on that upper layer of power. While if the upper layer of power is sandy, then it is very easy to get through. So I think it's a nice metaphor, this layered approach, but as I will discuss in a few minutes, it also has some shortcomings, especially talking about South Africa, which is where we are now. I came up with the layer metaphor in 2008, well, a bit before, but it got published in 2008. Just to give you an idea what I mean in practice, there might be countries that decide to build dams together, like a friendship dam. On the River Senegal, for example, 3 countries have jointly managed and developed the river. But that doesn't mean that the people who are living in those countries are actually going to benefit. As the African proverb says, whether elephants mate or fight, the grassroots can suffer. That this can happen a lot with these big infrastructural projects, which will benefit countries economically, but also may displace people who actually live in that area. But the other way around can also work, where people locally cannot manage to influence their governments to change their mind about an hydroelectric dam or an irrigation policy. They might call on the international press, the international public opinion, and in so doing influence their government from another layer, another venue of power. Sikink and Keck have written about that, Catherine Sikink and Margaret Keck, called boomerang politics. So the one layer can influence or be suppressed by another layer of power. And there's quite a few examples of that. And also Professor Anamika Barua yesterday alluded to that when talking about 4 layers that are influenced and influencing transboundary water negotiations. So that's the layer cake, which was presented in the context of hydrohegemony. There have been many conferences in the UK and in the Netherlands on hydrohegemony, the concept that Mark Zaytoun and I published about in 2006, and Anna Cascao ventured the idea of counter-hegemony. And our current event is like an offspring of that, or a distant cousin of that. We're not so much focused on hydrohegemony, but definitely on the politics of multiple levels. What is hydrohegemony? Hegemony is a political or cultural dominance or authority over others, which can be both material and ideational. So it's not just coercion, but also consent. If I want to wield power over you, it doesn't help me if I just threaten to imprison you or beat you. I also have to give you the sense that my power exercise will benefit you. Or find other ways, which may also be the power of attraction or a power of persuasion, to continue wielding my power, to reproduce my power position. Now, these power relations are not cast in stone. They may change. A very famous example is on the River Nile, where Egypt for a long time managed to hold sway over its upstream neighbors, the Sudan and Ethiopia. But as the global chessboard changed and the colonial benefits that were bestowed on Egypt and post-colonial benefits became less important, and new powers came up like China, which invested heavily in Sudan, and Ethiopia became a regional superpower. Ethiopia felt safe to built this enormous Millennium Dam, or the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, despite protestations of Egypt. You're well aware of that situation, I'm sure. Despite Egypt threatening to bomb the dam or make the dam a casus belli, a cause for war. But in the end, Egypt cannot punch as high as it used to in the 1950s and 60s. So the hegemonic position changed, but at the same time, the domestic positions also changed. In 2011, Egypt had its revolution, which provided a power gap for Ethiopia to seize on. And Ethiopia itself now is still involved in on and off in civil war, which in turn makes it easier for Egypt to do some politics of delay. So there is multiple power play going on, famously in the Nile, but of course in many other aspects as well. And if we then use the cake metaphor, we can think of baking the cake together, of cutting the cake together, whether in a integrated or distributive configuration. And we can ask the question, as Professor Benjera did yesterday, whose cake is it anyway, to discuss how current power relations are rooted in a very long history of a colonial history, which makes power still be inscribed in constitutions and in the international water world. The ideas that hold sway often are rooted in much more deep-rooted relations. So the cake metaphor, the hegemony, some of those keywords we have discussed, and also whether the cake is a good metaphor for the situation in South Africa. Is it a hierarchy of scales between national, regional, and local scale? Should we let go of the idea of scales at all? Should we have a relational ontology, which means there's no hierarchy between the scales? Should we see scales as network, as Harriet Bulkley has proposed? Are they spheres of authority? In conversation with Richard Meissner, he's persuaded me that actually this is probably one of the better metaphors, the spheres of governance, because the national government cannot just impose its will. It will have to persuade, co-opt, coax other spheres to come up with the outcome that it prefers, and that means some negotiation, some fine-tuning, some massaging perhaps. And so the layer cake might not be the ideal metaphor for South Africa. Now, we have also discussed yesterday the idea of how the central and the local level, in this case the national level, also have had some tensions between themselves at the time of drought. In the international press, this was presented as kind of the end of the world for South Africa. The water would definitely run out. There was a clock in 90 days. Cape Town will be without any water. That, of course, was not the case. There's still standpipes, and in townships, people don't get piped water often on a regular basis either. But for the middle class, it seemed like impending doom, if you would believe the reporting. And I would think that kind of nicely juxtaposes two philosophies of dealing with water, which are very political, ideological, whether we should expand the supply through power, hydropower, and pipeline infrastructure, big modernist infrastructure to provide everybody with water for the future. Intra and interbasin water transfer from the Vaal, from other water sources, even from international, like the Lesotho Highlands, versus the city level, where the Democratic Party was holding sway, which was all about demand management. So doing more with what you have, and not going for a techno-fix, but rather for a behavioral response. Although also investing in infrastructure, but much more smaller infrastructure like small hydro, but also trying to change behavior through price incentives, through communication and banking on the innate sense of humor that the South Africans display every day, all day, I think. This is definitely different from the Netherlands, who can sometimes be a bit grumpy. So it was very enjoyable to see how, with jokes, with challenges, the Cape Townians dealt with the impending doom. And not for a moment did we see any of the predicted Mad Max scenarios of fighting about water on an individual basis, but rather a display of solidarity. Of course, these theses and antitheses in the end, I think currently are developing in some sort of synthesis. There is more large hydro coming Cape Town's way, but also desalination and still a sense of responsibility communicated to people in Cape Town. It's not always as black and white, as contrasting as it's sometimes made out to be, but it shows how the national political and expert community could be at odds with the local political and expert community as a standoff between two very different philosophies, different views of the future and of the role of technology and behavior in making the people enabling water security. So another example of what I would call the layer cake, in which these power layers, the scales of authority, clash with each other and are currently interacting with each other in a more cooperative way, perhaps. But definitely it remains politics. You can't understand it without politics. Yesterday, Barbara van Koppen and her colleagues, Barbara presented and showed this picture about the polycentric approach in accountability on WASH, water supply and health, water supply, sanitation and health, co-management rather than a hierarchical control. And we can also see that it also happened yesterday. Mike Muller referred to the transboundary politics between South Africa and its neighbors over the conservation of the Okavango and the politics over Limpopo and Nkomati, which can perhaps be captured in multi-level games. And multi-level games are kind of, at least, let's say, a quarter of the articles in the book that I'm presenting today, in one way or another refer to the two-level or multi-level political or game, as he calls it, multi-level game metaphor developed by the American political scientist, sociologist David Putnam. The idea is that these levels of diplomacy or of political interaction influence each other. A political change of scene after elections at home may influence how a country might do diplomacy, whether it will be accommodating or be a rogue country. But the outcome of international diplomacy also has an impact on local politics. And I'll give you a short example on the Rhine, the River Rhine in Europe, which is my chapter in the book. Speaking of which, what is the book about? Well, it's a multi-level perspective of water, the layered approach on the nexus of international and domestic river governance. And here is the contents. You can see some names that will look familiar to you, including Richard Meisner, also Sumit Vij, Alexandra Turgul Kaplan, who will speak in a bit. So several of the people in our community and who are in this book will also speak today. I'm very proud that they contribute to this book. Here is Richard's chapter, and this is a nice transition, I think, to how not only material water and material power interactions, but also ideas, the power of ideology and paradigms comes into play. Because Richard's chapter is all about how fundamentally European and American ideas, such as integrated water management and adaptive water management, land or fail to land when transplanted into South Africa. And I think that Richard's point is that it's largely failed to land, and especially in the relations with Mozambique and in the between the multiple stakeholders in this Nkomati Usutu water management area. My chapter, as I said, is on the River Rhine, and there we see an interplay between the basin level and a super local, just a few square kilometers, how the macro and the micro can be interrelated. And the River Rhine, people in the room and online will probably be aware, is like an international exemplar of cooperation between Switzerland, Germany, France, and the Netherlands on transboundary water. Well, it took 40 years to get there. So if this is an exemplar, then you can see that it's not an easy or even unproblematic process, but rather full of crises, and sometimes with exploited crises. This year on World Water Day, a report came out that in part started expanding the water wars narrative, which comes up every year around World Water Day, to Europe. In itself, that's nice, because normally water wars are placed fair and square into the global south, as if it's only people in hot countries, in tropical countries, will fight over water. As I'll show you in a bit, the European diplomacy can also get quite intense. But water wars, neither here nor in Europe, are very easy to predict. They're very likely to come true. So I think it's a lot of attention grabbing. Even Spain and Portugal, who really don't like each other very much and have more than 10 shared rivers, have a treaty, the Albufeira Treaty, and that seems to be a pretty solid treaty even in times of drought, of prolonged drought. So I'm not fully persuaded about the realism of water conflict in the EU, but it does put our mind at least to the lack of cooperation that sometimes is visible in a European context. I was talking about crisis. The modern history of the River Rhine is full of crises, including disasters. The Sandoz industrial disaster, where agrochemicals were accidentally released and found their way all through the Rhine into the Dutch territory. And the Netherlands, as a downstreamer, is also the sewer of the River Rhine. If upstream potassium production effluents end up in the Netherlands, and there's very little that we could do. There was also an insecticide spill in 1969. And in the early 70s, the Rhine was declared pretty much dead, biologically dead. You could develop old-style photographs into the River Rhine. So many chemicals were found in the River Rhine. And the Netherlands, as a downstreamer, took upon itself to be a policy entrepreneur. After these repeated incidents, the Netherlands says, "Come on, guys, clean up your act. We need to do this more cooperatively." Upstreamers, France and Germany, were not really in the mood to do the Dutch a favor. So the Dutch also supported litigation by NGOs and by the city of Rotterdam against the upstream countries to teach them a lesson, with some success. So in the 1980s, a joint plan was developed to clean up River Rhine, and as a symbol of that cleanup, the restoration of the river salmon in the River Rhine. Now, I'm not a fisheries expert, but definitely what I know is that an anadromous fish, that means river fish who migrate upstream and then later downstream to spawn and to the life cycle of a fish can span thousands of miles from the fry stage. Then the fish will migrate to the US and Canada to grow. Then it come back to Europe to spawn. So it basically much of its life, a fish is busy migrating from Europe to North America and back. But it can only do that if there are no dams and other obstacles in the way of the fish. And we're talking about sturgeon, lamprey, trout, but more symbolically, the salmon. So this became a big thing in the 80s. Let's bring the river salmon back into the Rhine. Let's clear the obstacles, but also create a biological environment, a clean environment in which fish can survive. Here are the migration routes of the river salmon. And one choke point was in the Netherlands, the Haringvliet, which is a passage, a small bit of the River Rhine takeoff, through which fish can enter the Netherlands and swim up the River Rhine. Now, the Netherlands had a big flood in 1953. 1,800 Dutch people lost their lives, and a few hundred people in Belgium and the UK. So the Dutch, as a solution, built a huge coastal defense infrastructure to basically straighten the Dutch coast and protect all the estuaries, arms of the River Rhine, or sea arms. So in the estuary basically was closed off from the sea to protect the Dutch from any future coastal floods. But not letting the water get in also meant not letting the fish get out, or the fish get in. So when in 1971 the Haringvliet Dam was built, that meant the end of the estuary life and the migration routes for the salmon and the trout and other anadromous fish. That meant that the ecosystem basically was killed. It was basically sacrificed for security from floods. The 70s was also when environmental groups started to make themselves felt, and participatory processes started to be legislated for. So civil society became much more powerful in influencing government policy, and also at the European level to lobby for cleaner rivers and biodiversity for ecosystem conservation. So what to do? This closure dam, the idea was to build a small passageway into the river dam. The dam has sluices, and opening those sluices now and then with the tide coming in and out would also create a passageway for the fish to come in. So the Netherlands pledged to have this done by 2000, so that one of the last obstacles for the river fish as they came in from the sea to migrate upstream in the direction of Switzerland. But then the political scene changed. The idea of saving the salmon was entirely ditched when a new government in the early 2000s took stage, a new coalition, Christian Democrats and conservative liberals, a coalition that held sway for the next 10 years. they were not so interested in preserving the quality of the River Rhine. They were much more interested in saving Dutch agriculture and nationalist policies, so that they started dragging their feet. And for the next 18 years, the Dutch dragged their feet in opening the sluice gates, giving a lot of space for very local politics, some very local issues that where inlets should be, how much land should be sacrificed for this infrastructural works. As I was mentioning, just a few square kilometers were disputed between the provincial authorities and NGOs and farmers' organization. But all this wrangling held up the reintroduction of the salmon into the Rhine for 18 years. That was not noted without discomfort on behalf of the European Union, and the European Union started to make strong statements. Guys, if you're not going to play, we might slap a fine on you, or we're going to make you look really bad. So especially in 2010, when the Netherlands had a populist-supported coalition, which basically ignored all international agreements, not only on the Rhine, but also on the River Scheldt, basically saying, we don't care about international cooperation. We were basically a neighbor from hell. Then a new government took place, and lo and behold, a lot more cooperation with European neighbors. Actually, I heard later that several top-level officials in the Netherlands have been lobbying, doing some backroom lobbying with the French and German and Swiss neighbors, saying, guys, this populist government, it won't hold very long. Please wait, give us some space, give us some time. This will come, this will recht come. So it will come up, it will be solved. And indeed, once the new government, which had, let's say, a more centrist left-wing approach and more space for international solidarity, in the end decided to go ahead with making this small space into the river closure, so that more tidal dynamics were possible and more space for river fish to migrate. So all's well that ends well, but it took 18 years and still hasn't been quite finished, because also in France there has been some issue over dams. So that is still yet to be concluded, as far as I know. So the power of downstreamers, in this case the Netherlands, to hold up policy that was originally agreed on between all the riparians was considerable. The small Netherlands and even smaller regional players managed to delay implementation of environmental legislation. And part of the reason is that both the Rhine Action Plan and the Rhine Commission and the Dutch governance system left quite a few gaps open. There was not a very solid system of enforcement of these treaties. And it was not a high, in the 2000s, a high policy priority. So an almost deliberate neglect of implementation of this, the River Rhine Treaty, left to space for, to take space, political space, by a regional and local farmers organization to lobby the central government and to hold up the implementation of the Rhine Treaty. So I would say this is a nice example of the politics of scale, with some dynamics in there, because the river, of course, the migration is the key dynamic of this, making space for fish migration. It shows that Dutch and its neighbors don't necessarily see eye to eye on the government, on the environment, depending on who is in charge in the coalition governments. That doesn't mean that we're going to have fights over water, that we're going to have water wars, But it does mean that we should not set up the river Rhine as an example. Of course, it's great that there is a deal, and many rivers are still awaiting a deal, including the Brahmaputra, which probably Sumit will mention in his presentation. But it's all far from ideal in terms of cooperation. There's a lot of hegemonic politics and anti-hegemonic politics going on before something, and especially the role of crisis in making progress should not be underestimated. It has to get worse before it gets better, it seems. That doesn't mean we're going to have a water war. I also would like to add that we're not necessarily going to have a peace over water alone, that water may be a factor in creating peace, but there will be a lot more factors in place before we're going to have peace, for example, between Israel and Palestine. This water centricity can be like a bubble, and we might forget about the many cross cross currents that water is only one part of that make the difference between war and peace. So this is my presentation. I think I should leave space for the other speakers soon, and maybe for some questions. But one last thing that I would like to advertise, not only the book, but also our journal, in which Sumit also is a co-editor. Both social science and environmental science people are involved in this journal, so we regularly have contributions for people who are not necessarily social scientists, but take an interest in governance issues. Currently we have a special issue about water for food in deltas, but this new one that we're advertising here is all about this conference. Several people involved in the conference have already indicated interest. But if you have colleagues and friends who would be interested to join and send an abstract or send a full article, please do. All about the hydropolitical layer cake. The journal is called the International Journal of Water Governance. What is special about our journal is that it's not only free to read, so open access, but also free to publish in, unlike, for example, Ecology and Society and other more commercial publications. So we see this journal as a service to society. Nobody should be paying for science, but it is also rigorously peer-reviewed. So you cannot use it as a vanity press. Articles do get rejected if the reviewers don't consider them good enough. But fortunately, we have quite some nice publications in the past few years, and we're looking forward to expand our production about international water governance. Because the strange thing is that water governance we still don't have very good textbooks on water governance or journals on water governance, which is a gap that we try to fill with our International Journal of Water Governance. I think I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you very much for your interest, and I look forward to hearing some response and some questions maybe. But I know we're also short in time, so I'll hand back to our chair, which in this case is Richard. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Jeroen, for that presentation. Quite elaborate presentation explaining the conference and the theme of the conference. And also thank you very much for introducing the book, which we're looking forward to read. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go into the first session now. Professor Evaristo Banheira, he's the chair of the session, and all three the presenters will be online. I mentioned this morning Alexandra Turgul from Oregon State University, Dr. Sumit Vij from Wageningen, and Dr. Alicia Ofori from Canfield University on Ghanaian water politics. So over to you, Professor Benyera.
Can I chair from here or I need to?
Excuse me?
Can I chair from here or I need
Yeah, no, because it's online. I mean, you can chair from there, as long as we can hear you.
reach here also? It's a very short line.
Yeah. So you want to sit from, you want to chair from here?
Okay, let me chair from here.
Oh, you can also chair from there. Because now we're not online.
Oh, the other line.
But whatever you want.
Thank you, Professor Miesna, and welcome to our panel, Dr. Sovinia Naidu. I wanted to ask to request her to excuse herself so that she could be online. Yes. Apologies for that, colleagues. Online, we have our presenters, Alexandra Tugul from Oregon University. We have Sumit Vij from Wageningen University. And we have Alessia Ofori from Cranfield University. Can I confirm that we have all our speakers online?
Yes, I'm online. This is Sumit.
This is who?
Sumit.
Sumit, thanks very much for confirming. Is Alessia online?
Alexandra is online.
Alexandra is online. Thanks very much. Just before I hand over to our first speaker, who is Sumit Vij, who is going to talk about water, India water infrastructure, just a few admin issues, 20 minutes each person. I don't know how I can tell them that it's 5 minutes up. How do I do it? I will make a bit of noise, yes. So yesterday after the conference, I went back home and I told my daughter that I was at a water conference. And my daughter said, "What? A conference about water? Is it really that complicated?" And I said to her, "When you think about water, what do you think about?" And she said to me, water is a crime-fighting and deterrent instrument. How is that possible? She says, "Oh, it's very easy. When they catch a thief that they assume that is a drug addict, Professor Vanna, here we've got a problem with something called nyaope. So if they catch somebody that they think is using that drug called nyaope, they will pour water on them. They will say everything. Apparently, people that use that drug are hydrophobic. They don't want to be rained, they do not bath. So if you want them to speak, just bring a bucket of water and then they will tell you everything." Sumit, please, can you address the conference, India water infrastructure, and you have 20 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, for a very interesting introduction. I would say a bit of chemistry there, which was one of my education in the past life. First of all, thank you to Richard and Jeroen for inviting me for this conference. I think, Jeroen, you did a very nice opening for today, also bringing out the book, so kudos on that. I'm really looking forward to the book. It's been, I'm sure, I'm not sure, but I know it's a long journey for you, bringing the book together with different co-authors from around the world. So really looking forward to that. Now let me just try to share my screen. I know we don't have much time today, at least 20 minutes from my end. First, I'm going to check, can everyone see my screen? Yes? Okay, that's good. So I will quickly start now. I know we had a bit of a broad topic on the agenda for me. But what I'm going to talk about today is about the book chapter that also Jeroen was discussing, which is about non-decision making, but it's definitely on water infrastructure. And particularly, I would bring a couple of examples from the Brahmaputra Basin in India, and which are relating to hydropower dams. The argument I'm trying to make is that these hydropower dams, or particularly infrastructure, are forever ideas. They might go away for a bit, but they come back. And that has been a bit apart in the last 6 to 7 decades, and that's the time period I'm going to talk about. And see how they bring contestation, what's the politics around it. So it's not just the politics of water, but it's the politics of water infrastructure. And where do we see ourselves now in that whole contestation of water infrastructure in the last 6 or 7 decades? So let me just begin with a bit of a history of where we are and what kind of larger theoretical but also academic debates we are talking about when we're talking about water infrastructure. Whether it's large irrigation schemes or infrastructure related to that, but on the other side, large hydropower projects. I would go back to Carl August Wittfogel, who wrote the book about Oriental despotism, and basically the argument was that the large-scale irrigation systems in the 1940s, 50s were used by the autocratic leaders to control over society, to bring some kind of a control over society, providing them with the infrastructure, providing them with the water that could be used for agriculture purposes. And this is the way he argued that the autocratic leaders were trying to bring control. And although there was a lot of criticism about it later on, especially on the methods he used to confer this, but also about the cases he chose. But at least it sets the right tone or gives an initiation to a lot of academic discussion through his book on Oriental despotism. Of course, things don't stay as they are. It changes, and there are newer debates that came through, and there was an ecological turn with the oncoming of Silent Spring from Rachel Carson to a lot of ecological-based movements in the 1960s and 70s. And particularly, there are authors talking about South Asia and India. There was a big forest movement called the Chipko movement. Which is very unique in its own way, where women were in the forefront to protect the forests. And that idea itself brought this whole nuanced understanding that there is a change from this large scale irrigation or infrastructure that could influence society, that people are also very important who can bring that change. And along with that, there was this big push by the World Bank to invest on the big dams and large water-based systems, not necessarily on smaller or maybe more localized water infrastructure. Maybe it's the drinking water system, but they were more focused on building the dams. However, this contestation between the environmental movements and the big push resulted in a bit of deliberation, which kind of took us in the direction towards the 21st century, where water technology and economics around that was kind of questioned, and it was kind of amended. And this is where we could also see some results around the World Commission of Dams in 2000, there was big criticism around the sediment load, the effects of flooding, the bank erosion, the ecological deprivation in certain areas where the dams were built. All those questions were brought in. But along with that, it was not in isolation. Like I said earlier, all these different debates, all these different, I would say, deliberations came along with others. And there was this big agenda around neoliberalism, which kind of forced or pushed the water financialization, but also market mechanisms came through. There was a big push again for the technological fixes, and concepts like benefit sharing and payment for ecosystem services also emerged. If we look at it from further down, maybe more around 2008, 2009, it was later in the 2000s, we saw that the climate agenda came back. And or not necessarily came back, but came back more strongly, right? Because it started in 1990s, but adaptation kind of brought in. And then hydropower, or the water infrastructure that I've been talking about, came back again on the agenda, at least in the global south. We saw in Southeast Asia, but also South Asian countries, we saw that a lot of hydropower projects were kind of renewed. But again, this was challenged, and this was challenged in a bit different. And this time it was not the ecological term.